I am tired. Just this month, the remains of 215 children were discovered in a mass unmarked grave at a former Indian residential school in British Columbia. And closer to home, a Muslim family was targeted by a white man when he jumped the curb, struck them intentionally with his truck, and then drove off, killing four. And that's just this month. And while trying to navigate what feels like multiple pandemics, I also find myself changing jobs. And as I transition roles in universities, moving from a mid-level role to a senior one, what lessons am I taking with me? Over the next 6-ish minutes, I hope to share a few, and among them, my new love-hate relationship with the term resilience. As a queer, non-disabled, brown, Desi South Asian cisgender man, much of this past year has been a struggle. And as I say that, I know that for so many others, and in particular my Black and Indigenous cousins and siblings, their entire being, their entire lives has been a struggle. A scholar of global health, ethics, and human rights, Dr. Roberta Timothy, writes of grief as, and I quote, a direct result of racism and intersectional violence that affects us physically, emotionally, financially, spiritually, transnationally, and transgenerationally, end quote. And there's plenty of grief to go around, right? The increasing visibility of what has always been the ongoing carnage of Black and Indigenous bodies is now commonplace. Anti-Asian hate, now boiling over, remains unchecked and almost state-sanctioned. And then there's anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and transphobia, and all of this being remixed, recycled, and repackaged, opening up old wounds. And more recently, it has hit me even closer. In India, an increasingly fascist state, the multidimensional weight of COVID-19 has resulted in a so-called collapse of healthcare systems that never existed in the first place. How am I supposed to feel when the country of my ancestors is on fire, even as fires rage around me here? The guilt and shame of being pulled in different directions is real. And so what if Black, Indigenous, and other racialized professionals tried to make it all work, tried to make it all fit in housing and residence life, in a pandemic, in these multiple, dueling, overlapping pandemics? What if me? Does my recent career success obfuscate my pandemic experiences? It shouldn't. And yet for so many on the outside, it does. It apparently evens out. But to think in that way is at best reductive and homogenizing, and at worst strips me of my agency to speak my truth, that the both and the and can be possible. And this brings me to my love-hate relationship with resilience. Now, don't get me wrong, I believe in resilience. It is, after all, largely understood as the human ability to recover or bounce back, or even to adjust to difficult conditions. We use this word in policymaking and recruitment videos and residence curricula. Heck, we've even given ourselves a resilience gold star or even 10. But here's the thing. Resilience, as we've come to know it, as we've come to use it, is simply the individual's ability to adapt to whatever the system throws its way. And the system is allowed to stay exactly as it is, without change, without threat, without consequence. It is you and me who are jumping through hoops of fire. When British Petroleum Deepwater Horizon spilled its oil to devastating effect, President Obama called for people to be resilient, and Tracy Washington, an activist and lawyer, pushed back. She said, "Stop calling me resilient, because every time you say, oh, they're resilient, that means you can do something else to me. I am not resilient," end quote. For Black, Indigenous, and other racialized housing professionals, everyday survival has been resilience, and we are depleted. We are past running on empty. We're done. So when you say, oh, you're resilient, I want to ask you, where the heck have you been before now? And do you even know my life? And here's the thing. Working with multiply minoritized young adults at the intersections of race, gender, and sexuality, my own research found that resilience is not one thing, and it clearly is not something that any one individual has. Let that sink in for a moment. Resilience may not be individual at all. It emerges as a product between that young person and their environment, and is ultimately shaped by relationships between people. And so resilience is also certainly not about restoration or going back to a status quo. It is about survival plus resistance. And it is mined in the ecology that surrounds me and you, where an ecology is not only about culture and people, but also includes structures and processes, relationships, services, and outcomes. Rekha, one of the young adults in my research, offered the parable of the carrot, the coffee bean, and the egg. When she explained what resilience meant to her, she went on, if you put a carrot in boiling water, it gets mushy, it can't stand. If you put an egg in water, it becomes hardened. But if you put a coffee bean in boiling water, it changes the water. Resilience for Reika was not about adapting to her environment. It was about her changing her environment. It was about finding what in her environment worked for her and what in her environment did not serve her and getting rid of that. It was about changing her environment in ways that felt good and productive for her communities. Reika needs neither our permission, recognition, or validation. Her calculated game of chess is not for you or me. This is about survivance and not performance. And for Black, Indigenous, and other racialized peoples like Reika, the students we encounter, the professionals we work with, our daily hard-fought negotiation, our resilience is not for your viewing pleasure. We are not your shiny trophy of persisting through a totally shit system. There needs to be a shift. Resilience for me is less of an achievement and more of a sensibility, an intrinsically personal act of political warfare, a sensibility that values as daily practice the concessions and sacrifices that we BIPOC professionals make as we negotiate our marginality on campuses, relationally, structurally, and systemically. So let's take a time out. Let's reclaim resilience away from individuals and instead orient towards the ecology. Let's invest in that ecology by using our privilege to change it, to dismantle it, to tackle systems and structures, and to reimagine different ways of being and becoming. Because otherwise, our desire for a more just profession runs hollow. Let's face it, as BIPOC folks, we're much more fabulous as a coffee bean. But without structural change, we run the risk of having you render us to being either the carrot or the egg. This is our reckoning. What will you do? Whatever you choose, just don't call me resilient. Thank you so much for listening.